Welcome to Crossing Phase, the podcast, the first one featuring a Christian and a Muslim talking religion and politics. This is our post 2020 election episode in which John and I finally catch up because we had the election week and then I was on vacation. And so we're catching up and finally dishing on what we think happened in this most recent election and what's going to happen moving forward. And we are both donning it's T-shirt day here on
T-shirt
Crossing
day.
Phase, evidently. So
I egged you on this one because I did egg you on this one because it was really funny because you did. First of all, it was election week, and I go, so how do you feel about the election? And you said, I'm going to Disneyland. So I thought it was a joke because that's what you say at the end of the Super Bowl. And you actually were going to Disneyland. And then you sent me a
Disney
picture.
World, Orlando.
Yeah. Then you sent me this picture and it just was a t-shirt that said princess on it. And I couldn't see the rest of it. And I go, what are we doing? What's going on, princess? And then you showed me the rest of the shirt, but the initial response was, I gotta dig into this one.
Yep. So we with the big family went to Disney World the week after the election, and that included my 4-year-old daughter and her cousin who just turned 4 over that week. And so for one of the days there, the dads and the grandfather wore these Princess Protection Agency shirts. So for those of you who are listening on audio, I have a black shirt that says Princess Protection Agency on it, and it's got a little a crown on the top, and the princess is kind of styled loosely like the Disney D for that week. It's clearly a ripoff, but John coaxed me into wearing it on Crossing Phase. So I'm not sure what this does.
We decided to do T-shirt day. It says it's Dari for laughter, so fun day is what it is. So
he didn't ask me for my far cooler Star Wars T-shirts. I even have one with the Baby Yoda on it from Mandalorian. But
Mandalorian, I'm just going to say it right now. They're doing it. I'm not a Star Wars guy at all. Don't understand what's happening half the time. Confused, disoriented, and my attention span is completely off with it.
Yeah,
some people are Star Trek guys. There's
the universe is so huge now. The universe and the spinoffs are so huge now. I mean, who can keep up with it? But if you tell a good story in the Star Wars universe, I'm probably going to watch it.
Well, I mean, so I'm a Dune guy. So and that's painfully obvious, right? So
Dune hasn't exactly taken off with the multiverse era of entertainment or the theme parks.
Again, Star Trek people, they could say they're the Star Wars people, but Mandalorian is it's pretty sexy, and it's nice to see unpolished, normal dudes and ladies hanging out. And it not being so seriously, I don't know, it's mission centric, but it's not so seriously, I don't know, Disney in many ways. And that's funny because Disney took over it, right? So it's not, it's a little rough around the edges. And what's that?
I watched some of the making of some of the producers having conversations about the Mandalorian, and that you kind of hit on what I think they go after, is that the Star Wars universe, it never makes fun of itself, kind of in the context of its own videos, but it also doesn't take itself too seriously, right? And so it's kind of a fine balance between kind of mocking its own universe versus holding itself lightly and not taking itself too seriously. So I think you see a lot of that.
Yeah, there's a lot of realism.
Yeah,
a lot of realism there. I mean, there's this time when the two, I don't know, the guys that are in the speeders.
No spoilers. I'm only through episode 1 of season 2, man. No spoilers.
No, this is season 1. So season 1, that the two guys on the speeder bikes that were the Imperial guys from Endor, which I don't know, but what those guys are. I have no idea what their names are. But they're in the white outfits, and they're definitely on speeder bikes, and they've got little Yoda. And that they're sitting over a hill and they're looking over into the town and they're going to bring little Yoda in, but they start talking and there's banter back and forth. Whoever wrote that, that's what soldiers, That's what all soldiers interact with each other in the field. They're always they're joking back and forth. They're kind of, aloof with what their conversation is and back and forth, but they're very, because they're comrades in arms and they're doing stuff. So whoever wrote that dialogue kind of knew. And so it's been pretty cool, So
I remember that scene. I forget the specific conversation, but I know exactly what scene you're talking about.
He's like, "Let me see it," and he's like, "No, I'm not gonna let you see it." It's like funny.
They're messing with each other. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's like, "No, you don't do that." No, And then he's like, "You just shut your mouth." You know what I mean? He's like, eat your candy bar. It's that type of. So, but yeah. So Mandalorian is the big thing, and then this chess show is all the rage. I don't know if we're doing a review of Netflix or something, but this chess show, this young lady who plays chess on Netflix.
Oh yeah, I saw the advertisement.
Is like the big deal, and we getting hot and heavy into that. It's been an interesting. That's been interesting going back and forth. But I do my normal stuff. But Dune movie was supposed to come out in November. It's not coming out. They're gonna make it go another year, I guess. Yeah. So that's a big disappointment.
That's too bad. Now, is it a redo? Is it a remake, or is it a prequel?
It's a remake.
Is it a sequel? Okay.
No, it's a remake of the movie, which, if you haven't read the books, the movie doesn't make a lot of sense. The De Laurentiis movie, the David Lynch movie of 1984. So, they focused on the wrong things. I'll say this just for the Dune fans. The weirding modules, they overemphasized this whole thing with the heart plugs. That's nonsense, and they really just took away from the plot. But the characters were pretty cool. The outfits were pretty neat. So, but and if you know the books, it's sexy enough. But they're redoing the movie, and theoretically, it's going to be off the charts, and everybody's really excited. Who's Dune oriented? The four of us that are still around and excited about it. So, but we got post-election craziness.
Yeah, but and did I miss it? Did you explain what's on your shirt? Especially because it's not in English.
Well, it's
your T-shirt day.
It's Farsi for laughter. So Hyundai is what it is. So, and that's my T-shirt today. So I was trying to figure it out. I had either Akron in like Coca-Cola. Or because I don't have a lot of shirt like looks like, but I'm like, oh, what other shirts do I have? I did have a shirt that said fruitcake.
That's almost the season for that.
Yeah, so I was like, I don't know where the shirt came from, but it was in my drawer. So I go, well, I could wear it and we could go for it, but so that's what the shirt is for.
The fruitcake thing reminds me of one little anecdote. I'll tell from our Disney trip. So my daughter's 4 years old. She had a blast. Podcast. It blew her mind. The Galaxy's Edge experience down in Epcot, that's the whole Star Wars world, is pretty insane. Highly recommend.
I've never been, so
it's pretty new, but that's maybe a topic for another time. But we're one of the later nights that we were there, walking into the Magic Kingdom, and of course Magic Kingdom is already lit up and decorated for Christmas. So they've got Christmas music playing. They've got Christmas trees in the square at nighttime. Cinderella's castle is all lit up with projection lights and animation. So it's like completely transformed. So we're rolling into Magic Kingdom one evening after dark. And my 4-year-old daughter says, "See, Mommy, we're skipping Thanksgiving."
Okay, all right.
Because all the Christmas decorations are still out, and we're still like, we gotta wait till Thanksgiving. And my 4-year-old daughter is really concerned that we're gonna skip Thanksgiving. So listen, you people, and I'm shaking my finger at the video camera for those of you who are listening to podcasts, you people who are playing Christmas music too early and decorating your trees already, knock it off because you're freaking out my 4-year-old. Anyway, that's my soapbox.
It's happened. I've got. So there's this place that does haunted. It's called Headless Horseman Haunted Hay Rides. I think I got it. And then they flip to Christmas. They're already in Christmas,
right? Yeah.
And then I've got like lawns with a lot of Christmas scape stuff going on. So that's already happening here. It's the real deal. But someone pleaded the case to me. They just said, well, you want to know what? It's COVID, and they want to bring Christmas joy early. And I was like, okay, yeah. I'm not gonna. How do you argue with that one?
Heard that. Here's how I argue with it.
There's Christmas stores that are year round. I went into, I found one of these Christmas stores. What are they doing?
I
don't even understand. It's hard for me to process. So what? So
my response
your
is
counter argument.
I understand people wanting to get to Christmas because it's and all the things that come with Christmas because they feel good and they want to just drag it earlier into 2020. I get it. The problem is they don't understand that it's all this extra seasonal Christmas stuff that caused 2020 in the first place. We broke the space-time continuum from playing Christmas music too early and putting up trees too early.
Are you saying that
this is my case?
Early Christmas caused COVID? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay. I don't know what's. All right, so
you heard it here. It wasn't a Chinese lab. It wasn't Chinese bats. We played Christmas music too early, too often. Anyway,
this sounds like the beginning of a movie. Like COVID was trapped in a Christmas, one of those balls you hang on the tree, and it fell and it slowly, like I don't even know. Like that one sound bite is gonna go out and then that's it. I'm done. They're gonna say he's done. So
it's like feeding. Look, it's like feeding a gremlin before after midnight. It just doesn't turn out well.
I remember Gremlins. I remember that. Yeah. That was
right.
Like that movie. I made no sense. If you feed it after a time frame,
the strongest argument from my Christian brothers and sisters, they say we want to celebrate the incarnation of God all year round, which I can't argue with, right? So if you have, so my extension of grace to those folks is I'm completely okay with Christmas music that's actually about Jesus, right? Away in the manger, joy to the world. Their Christmas music is actually about the historic and theological reason for Christmas. But if you want to play this middle 20th century nostalgic stuff that has nothing to do with the Christmas story, spare me that until after Thanksgiving. That's all I ask.
Are we? See, I'm hesitant. So do we get into the Christmas, the historical?
No, we don't have to go there. But songs like
do we get into? Do we wait into that? Let's say that for another show.
Here comes Santa Claus, and
So
maybe it's cold outside. And
do you have a manger with the baby Jesus? Does it go in Christmas Eve? How's that work?
Yeah,
What's your Christmas decoration situation?
We'll do a Christmas tree and Christmas lights, and there's a nativity that comes out. So we do it up. We do the Christmas tree and the
Is there a manger
situation? We typically not a big one. I think my child has it's a small manger. It's a toy manger thing. My mom was always big into has a number of different nativity sets.
Is it the manger is the basket that he was in?
Yeah.
Is that can we say manger and that means the nativity? Or is it the nativity? Does that mean the whole?
We typically say nativity. That means the whole set.
That means the whole
baby,
business.
Baby Jesus in the manger. Okay. Mary and Joseph, shepherds, 3 kings, 3 wise men. Sometimes typically there's an angel present. So you typically have like the stall, the feeder trough that baby Jesus lays in, and then
it's empty.
Then some kind of background. So some people will be as detailed to not put baby Jesus in until Christmas Eve or something. We typically don't go that far, but yeah.
Are you doing the 30 days with the chocolates and stuff like that? How's it?
What is it? The little Advent calendar. Yeah,
you got one of those
Advent
businesses
calendar.
or what?
I think my in-laws have one. I don't think we have a current one, but we always did growing up. You had little doors you opened up.
And little windows or something you pull open or something, and there's chocolate in there or something.
Sometimes they have chocolate. Sometimes they have got Bible verses, and so a lot of Christian families will.
Oh my God, how disappointing would that be? You open it and there's a Bible verse and there's no chocolate. Like, come on. It's gotta be.
But it doesn't start until after Thanksgiving.
Okay, so 2020 was ruined by early Christmas starting. Okay.
Why don't we do Easter every month too? While we're at it. Anyway, that's my soapbox on that. We'll turn back to the election. So 2020 election happened. As far as we know it, at the recording of this, we have a President-elect Joe Biden, and Trump has not achieved a second term. And that looks pretty clear at this point, even withstanding some lawsuits that will trickle through the system, and we'll see if there are any merits to those claims. But
Well, even if
assuming,
they are, he's not going to win the electoral votes. It doesn't. I mean, that was the
yeah,
the comment that was made to me, and then I was looking at the numbers. Even if he wins some of the lawsuits, it would still be difficult for him to get to the 270. And I just had this conversation you and I were just chatting about it before. Democracy works.
right?
I don't know why everybody's in such doomsday mode, because yes, 50% of the country thinks one way, 50% of the country thinks the other way. But and this is your point, this is your popular sovereignty. I say democracy, but popular sovereignty works. In this case, we have the most voters, and each candidate, the most voters voted for this president at one time.
Historic, unprecedented
So
levels of
what's the
voter
problem?
participation.
I mean,
Yeah,
I don't.
you and I both know the policy ramifications that are going to come out of this.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
broadly speaking, big picture, I'm pretty encouraged. Because it didn't flop one way or the other big time. I think the reason I'm encouraged, number one, high voter participation. That's good. That's a good thing.
yeah.
Whatever the reasons, we may have been polarized heading into the polls and angry at each other, but high participation in democracy, generally a good thing. I think I take that. Maybe somebody will
Well,
challenge me,
we've
but
said this before, where you could say what you want about Trump, but one thing that he's done is increased participation in our democratic process, by default,
yeah,
and like I said, I'm sure he hasn't, that wasn't part of his motivation. But the fact
right.
is we are all involved, and there's so many more people involved with our democratic process now more than ever, and that's an added benefit. That is something that, like I said, whether you like them or not, doesn't matter. And we've said that, or talked about that earlier in the podcast. But you're telling, so we are both of the same mind. It works. The system's
Yeah.
working.
Well, and sometimes it takes Americans time to get around each other, or to come to a conclusion. But American politics is never linear. That's what I think a lot of people don't understand. And so when Obama wins in 2008 and 2012, a lot of people on the right are wringing their hands and, oh, woe is me, and it's the end of conservatism, and where it's just gone on this progressive leftist train until Jesus comes back. And then Trump wins in 2016, and the left goes berserk and thinks democracy is going to cave in on itself. And you have the Washington Post, rebrand itself and says democracy dies in darkness, and everybody goes hashtag resistance before
Well, I
Trump's
mean,
even in office. And so,
it was a tough
like,
4 years. You can't say it
yeah,
wasn't.
yeah, I mean, but my point is wherever you land on that spectrum, whatever folks' reaction is to either the Obama presidency or to the Trump presidency, there's always reactions. And what we have this year is a different kind of reaction. But whatever folks were reacting to during the Bush era, Obama benefited from, and the Democratic Party benefited from for a couple years. And then, but even before Trump, look, the pattern that led up to Trump didn't start with Trump in 2016. It started in 2010 with the rise of the Tea Party,
Yeah.
in which Obama lost the House, as most first-term presidents do. Most first-term presidents typically lose control of the House, their party, during the midterm elections. So you get maybe 2 years of unified government, and then your heyday is over. And so Obama and the Democrats had their 2 years. They did the Affordable Care Act. Tea Party rose and took over the House in 2010, and I'm foggy on when the Senate shifted, but the point is, for Obama's last 6 years, He didn't have much legislative influence or impact because Republicans pretty much dominated, and they really dominated even at the state level. And so you saw that come to, maybe you could call it, to a head, or at least a plateau in support for Trump in 2016. So it didn't come out of nowhere. Trump took advantage of it, and it looked different. But you had the rise of Obama on the left. At the same time, you had the rise of the Tea Party, and then eventually Trump, the Trumpist kind of nationalism come in 2016. And then you've got, Biden and Kamala Harris uh, going with the Democrat trajectory that continues to move more and more leftist as far as like the national party leadership. And at the same time, they didn't win the Senate, and they're losing House seats in the same election that Trump lost. Yeah. And so my point about, I use the term popular sovereignty in the sense that it's collectively, as the American people, in spite of ourselves and in spite of our polarization, there were enough people, probably on the left and the right, to say two different things. Number one, that collectively, again, folks are kind of over the Trump presidency. Whether you like the policies, but were exhausted by the personality, wherever you land on that spectrum, there were enough Americans that said, we're kind of tired of this. At the same time, they also communicated to the Democrats, we're also not on board with this progressive train y'all want to run across the country. And so you have a situation where they voted Trump out of office, and also left a Republican, probably most likely a Republican controlled Senate, and lost Democrat seats in the House. So much so that the chair of the DCCC, the House Democrat arm that's responsible for winning elections, he resigned after the election because it was collectively a big loss for Democrats, even while the Democrat candidate for president won. So it was a pretty, my look at the election results is that popular sovereignty, as Americans collectively, kind of did a pretty surgical maneuver, unlike kind of the waves that people usually anticipate during presidential years. That's my hot take on the presidential election.
I mean, yeah, I agree with you. I think that there's the blue wave never happened. I mean, that was the big thing. And I was making sure that I said, people, you think that it's going to be a landslide, and the problem is that each side always thinks that they have the idea of some kind of that is going to win. That they're going to have a big win because of they've been speaking in their echo chambers, and we deal with this with the Earth movement and our religious constituencies all the time. Oh, you know what? Everybody's going to be on board with this because it makes so much sense. And there's nobody else in the room. So there's no one. I mean, that was our conversation. That's why we have this podcast, right? It's I think that the challenge here is that we're in the middle of a feud between parties, and it's much. I was talking with Manal about this, Manal Omar, about how it's very, very familiar to us, right, as Muslims, to the idea of a tribal feud, the idea of family feuds and that sort of thing. But it's also very familiar to you guys, right, as Southerners, right? So the hat feels in McCoys, and that's what politics has turned into. Right. And so we now know that there's two major factions of thought in this country, right? And those schools of thought need to start coming into the center to discuss things, what's going on, because people feel like we won the election, now we're in charge, right? And that's just not reality. We need to build that consensus in that middle road where no one's really going to win everything they want, but we got to kind of figure it out. And I hope the Biden administration listens to those voices. I had spoken to them about some multi-faith engagement and so forth, and they really didn't look at the faith vote, even though the faith vote was very important. I mean, particularly in Detroit, particularly in Michigan, 80% of the Muslim voters there voted for Biden, and so I think that, from a faith perspective, that was one of the outcomes. I think that that both parties did not do a good job at looking at the faith vote, and I don't want to say courting, but speaking directly to faith communities to motivate them on the issues that are important to each one of the constituencies. I mean, Trump definitely talks to the evangelicals and gets you guys fired up.
Yeah.
But I don't know. What did you think about the faith vote? Do you have any insight on that one?
Yeah, I think some of the best commentary and analysis of the faith vote is going to come from folks like David French, right of center, and then Michael Ware, left of center. So I'll maybe throw out some links in the show notes for those folks, because they're really in tune, particularly David French, to how evangelicals are thinking about stuff. And then Michael Ware does some really great analysis with the data at hand. I think both of them, especially Michael's, they're holding their the review of the exit polling very lightly, because obviously the same firms that do the pre-election polling are the same firms that do the exit polling, and boy, did they get the pre-election polling wrong in a lot of respects. So the exit pollings could be interesting, but whatever conclusions we draw, I think we got to take with a grain of salt, because they're the same firms that did the pre-election stuff, and I think the credibility of the polling industry has got to be pretty shot right now. I haven't seen much evidence of humility or error, but it's pretty shoddy work to get stuff that as wrong as they got. Now they will say, well, we got that, Biden was going to win, and our predictions panned out on that. It was like, yeah, the margins that they were espousing were often wrong, in consistently the opposite direction, and I think they've got a lot of egg on their face. Yeah.
Well, polling doesn't, to me, it's, like I said, I worked with one of the top polling firms in the country, and they, I spoke with their executive director many times, and he would always say, look, it depends on who pays for the poll and how we ask the questions. And then once the data comes in, we can manipulate the data any way we want. I think, but, and so there's that, but I think there's so much information out there now. And because of social media, because of the internet, if you take a poll, and let's just say it's a sound poll, the constituencies and issue-based engagement can make things shift very, very fast, almost in real time or near real time.
Right.
So, the poll might be valid at this moment in time, but this moment in time isn't as static as it was pre Facebook, pre Twitter, and so forth. And the president could switch his constituencies for or against them based on a tweet,
Right.
So, you're talking about shifting that is moving in light speed. So, whereas I think polls could influence more back in the day when we were radio isolated,
Yeah, and I think the polling industry's really got to come to grips with this dilemma, because a lot of Americans think now one of two things, neither of which is good for the polling industry. But number one, either there are polling groups who are trying to intentionally shift the election, right? Either push polling, which a lot of it's been going on for years. That's not conceptually anything new necessarily, but for like an entire industry to do it, to appear to do it in the context of a national election, not saying they did, but it has either the appearance of just an industry-wide push poll, or a really tough industry that has a hard time getting a handle on its main job description, which is to predict what and get a sense of what American people think on a presidential election. And so they're either, I think, it's the appearance of either incompetence or manipulation, and I think there has to be an answer for that dilemma. And if so, if you're going to say we're not manipulating, that's great. What's the problem with the industry, or what are the problems within the industry that make this so bad? To some extent, I'm
Well,
sympathetic because I recognize that we're not in the era of landline phones anymore, and we tend to screen calls from people from numbers we don't recognize, and so I'm sympathetic to pollsters who it's just a different technological landscape for people to deal with and get something kind of predictive that's accurate. But you either need to embrace that squishiness and that unpredictability,
yeah.
or you got a lot of Americans thinking that the industry is either incompetent or trying to manipulate them, which is not good. And we'll forget about all this come 2022 and 2024, and we'll be anxiously reading the polling like we do.
Well, I think all right. So polls now we're off on the polls, right? So and we're definitely feeling. I think it's an antiquated system, and something new needs to come up. Needs to come to the surface. It's something with data, trending analytics that is utilizing how the social media trends and aggregating all that information into something that says this is what it looks like. Like the Russians are doing when they they seem to be really good at helping making us do things at this point. I don't know, so and so that's one. But we'll have to just see. I'm hopeful at this point that the Biden-Harris campaign, or Biden-Harris President VP elect will start moving. Look at themselves as less than a win, and look at themselves as a transitional administration to engage as much as they can to bring not the usual suspects, the unusual suspects into the administration, and not just put together a cabinet of ex appointees. That's just something that I always accuse the Democrats of fetishizing their ex appointees, bringing them in, and then it's the same old. They should really bring in some new blood, and maybe some Republicans. I mean, my father was saying they should bring Kasich in and have him. I can't remember what my father was saying. It's maybe in commerce or something. My father was saying, well. I said, well, yeah, that would be neat if they brought some Republicans in, particularly the ones that are the non-Trumpers or whatever, and that would be really neat if they could thoughtfully assemble a dream team. Hesitant to say this, like the Kennedys, like Kennedy did. I don't want to do that. I know it's like I hate
I think you're right. I'm not one that's going to hold my breath on this. I frankly don't have a whole lot of confidence in the national level of the Democratic Party to do that, but I will agree on two things. There's an opportunity here for the Biden-Harris administration to be what you said, a transition administration, and one that if they hold to Biden's campaign promise that he would be a president for all Americans, not just Democrats, they do have a real opportunity here to kind of chill out the American political landscape by not trying to go as far leftist as they might otherwise want to themselves, and that includes how they make up the cabinet and who they tap to head up agencies and that kind of thing. We'll see how it plays out, but I do agree there's an opportunity there. We'll see if he takes advantage of it.
Yeah, it will. I mean, it's gonna be interesting. So okay, so should we talk about evangelicals post-election? What are we gonna do? I sent you a bunch of headlines. I just put in evangelicals, and then I just put in hit the button on Google News. And we got all these crazy, Trump's election support from evangelicals shows we're the biggest obstacle to racial justice. Evangelical reckoning begins. It's very ominous in the Atlantic. Andy Stanley's evangelical megachurch was empty on election night with only a few cars in the Disney World style parking lot out front. So evangelicals have been loyal Trump supporters. Where should they go now? What does that mean? So
yeah,
my question to you is, as an ever Trumper evangelical, and as a, we know the issues at hand, how do you see, what would be your advice, first of all, for the Biden campaign, or the Biden, president and vice president elect? What would be your advice to them on how to deal with some of the sticky issues in heading into the White House? That would be one. Two is, what would be your advice to your community and your tribe on what to do next? Like, what is the next level of engagement and participation in government?
Yeah. Great questions. Look, to the Biden administration, I say, look, there's a raft of nonpartisan but evangelical friendly institutions and organizations inside the Beltway and outside, and even a lot of single issue organizations, whether it happens to be on.
Crossing Phase is one of those organizations.
Sure. Sure. The whether it's on more centrist issues like see adoption policy, or anti-poverty programming, um, to some extent immigration policy. There are lots of groups that are very evangelical friendly that the Biden administration could tap into and court for some pretty I say centrist wins for um, issues that a lot of Americans, right of center and left of center, really agree on. Those issues and those organizations are out there. For evangelicals, my candid advice is we need to recalibrate how we do politics. And I think that's kind of my long-term project, generally speaking. But some of the high points are, we need to rethink how the local church engages the political space, how it counsels, or we would use the word disciple its members on how to think about politics. Not saying that local church should ever tell people how to vote, but it does have the responsibility for shaping our attitudes as church members towards the political space. And that includes how we treat one another when we disagree. And it also speaks to and has some requirements of us when we disagree with people who are outside the church, but are still our neighbors and fellow citizens with whom we collectively participate in this popular sovereignty experiment. And those two components I think are really, really missing. Number two, we got to stop this pattern of clergy endorsements of political candidates at virtually all levels. I'm going to say 99% of the time, there's no reason to do it. Look, if you want a local church or a non-governmental institution, a charity, I think you ought to be involved in some capacity in the public policy space. But that doesn't require endorsements. It doesn't require it. It requires relationship with policymakers, but it does not require political endorsements. That's kind of I think it's a pretty archaic American mode of engagement.
It does speak to, like, some of these Western, these Westerns out there of, and some of the movies that I remember from the past. I can't remember the name. Well, I can't. My father. I watched this movie with my father. It's about a famous trial. Oh my God! I can't remember. But here's the question I have for you, and maybe I'm putting you on the spot. Pastor Paula, Kenneth Copeland.
Okay.
Right. So, Pastor Paula, evangelical, White House advisor. Everyone's talking about her prayer for the president to win. What do we do with that? What's your commentary on that? I'm not even asking you a direct question.
I saw just a brief clip. I didn't watch the whole thing. I'm going to reiterate. Look, Paula White is not within mainstream evangelicalism. And while a lot of those folks in the sphere that most Orthodox evangelicals would consider something called prosperity gospel theology, is at least on the fringes of what we believe to be the Orthodox faith, or something that comports with the broad history of the Christian belief and traditions. And so while they have risen to prominence around President Trump's circles and look very influential, it doesn't make it's not representative of the broad collection of evangelicals, which is a movement. The evangelical movement, theologically speaking, is a movement that kind of cuts through and across denominations, including some Catholics consider themselves evangelical Catholics. And so I'm always gonna, you know me, I'm always gonna push back on the indication that Pastor Paula and Kenneth Copeland are representative of a movement. But here's my critique of whether they're part of the whether they're part of that prosperity gospel movement, or whether they're Southern Baptist, or whether they're other evangelicals that gravitated towards the kind of the inner circle of Trump's religious outreach. Instead of being critical, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to invite them to engage in the long-term public policy process, which requires presence in Washington, D.C., or at the state level, or at your local level,
right,
and doesn't require this kind of partisan endorsement power playing game, but it requires some professionalism, getting up to speeds on issues, working in coalitions to make really lasting, long-term public policy changes for the common good. And I think a lot of the folks that were in Trump's inner evangelical circles hardly engaged the public policy process, apart from endorsements and playing that kind of game. So even when they were welcomed, yeah, and a lot of them were single issues, but they're single issue people. But even before being single issue, they're not people who had a really high competence in understanding how this Washington game is played. And so you get to go to the White House, you get to go to the Rose Garden, and you get to squeak out some executive orders that are really limited in scope. But those are going to expire pretty soon. And so it makes for a lot of pomp and circumstances. Some stuff will hang around. There's always residual effects that, not every executive order gets undone by the following president. A lot of stuff hangs around because the new administration just has other stuff to get around to. So it's not meaningless, but I think I would encourage those folks, regardless of theological disagreements, look, engage in the long term. There are going to be institutions that did not get on the Trump train full bore are going to have a whole lot more influence with a Biden administration than anybody who was associated with Trump's inner evangelical circle. And those people who are engaged in the long game of public policy engagement and what I would call, from a Christian perspective, political witness. So that's my response.
You have such you always have well balanced. Kenneth Copeland, like what the laughing, the saying that, did you see that video, that clip? Basically, he's in front of his audience, and he basically says, Joe Biden, Joe Biden won, and then he just starts laughing, and he laughs uncomfortably for about 7 or 8 minutes, and all his followers though are
like an Austin Powers scene.
It's a Dr. Evil scene is what it is. So these are the two things that are out, and it's not even like this is, oh, you want Johnny P, we did a web search on it. I right away before the election, it was the Pastor Paula calling up the angels and then speaking in tongues, and everyone goes, well, don't you interact with her? Don't you? And I go, well, not much. I mean, nobody interacts with her much, but the point is that it's that's who she is. That's her jam. So I don't know if she has the access to Team Jesus that she claims, but the it's so there was so it was such a performance that it got national attention, and it's in everyone's house. The same thing with this Kenneth Copeland business. He was laughing, saying that no way Trump won, and Biden saying that he won, but there's no way that he won. And so, it speaks to this idea of here we have an election that shows that popular sovereignty works. Even it says that the Electoral College is actually functioning, admittedly, and that there is a regime change, and that his supporters are going to be upset. But the idea that from the pulpit, and this also ties to our conversation where we were talking about someone saying that he's never seen politics from the pulpit. I mean, this is very, very clearly support of a candidate, support and the denunciation of another candidate. And so I appreciate your thoughtful response, because it's like, what do evangelicals do now? Well, they engage. Well, they thoughtfully engage in the organizations that were not on board with the Trump train, give an opening for new blood, new thought, new innovation within the community. And that I think is a really big thing that's needed with the evangelical community. All of our communities need innovation, but specifically after this.
And I think where I'm critical of kind of my evangelical group is that while we have, I'm right in line with a lot of their policy objectives, but that things they want to see changed in government, whether it's abortion policy or religious liberty, but other bioethic things, or immigration, and down the line, smaller, things that harmonize with smaller government type conservatives and national security things. Look, I'm on board for most of that. But what we forgot is that the party itself, we just kind of use the Republican Party as a means to an end, the ends being policy changes. But I think what we forgot is that we didn't tend to the party as a thing itself that also needed tending and influence. And so when the party lurched and embraced President Trump for a lot of reasons that had nothing to do with theology, even in the primaries, there's a lot of data that shows that evangelicals were not on board the Trump train early. He had some support, but it was never demonstrable.
I mean, can you say it had to do anything to do with theology? I mean, it had nothing to do with theology.
No, not at all. And so I think in 2016, a lot of them, where we saw the kind of over spiritualized theological quote unquote justifications for supporting President Trump, that stuff came later. Support for President Trump really came from without evangelicals. But the moral of the story is that evangelicals in the primaries were either or both not united enough around another candidate, because there were like 16 other candidates, 14 other candidates in the primaries, and or weren't influential enough to raise somebody else up that was not Trump. And so when they're left to choose between a Hillary Clinton and a Donald Trump, they went with Donald Trump as kind of a policy gamble. And so what we forgot is that we didn't tend to the Republican Party in a way that prevented that or kind of inoculated the party from that happening. And so what I would encourage people, my evangelical group in particular, there's an opportunity here. A lot of there's some books and a lot of articles that have been written about how weak the political parties right now are in and of themselves. You have a lot of special interests that or single issue groups that dominate within the party, but the parties themselves are pretty weak. To me, I see that as an opportunity. If the Republican Party could be infiltrated and greatly influenced by someone like President Trump, who is largely a newcomer to the party, and largely has steered the party away from a lot of its ideological roots. The same thing can happen in the Democrat Party if folks want to decide to invest the time and resources it takes. I think both parties need reform. The lesson for Christians is to, regardless of whatever political party you feel more comfortable in, even if you're uncomfortable there. Pick one and engage in a way that reforms it towards a more Christian viewpoint. And I would encourage all Americans to do that, whatever their faith-based convictions are.
I mean, it's well said. It's a well thought out response. I think we've given, the idea that there is an opportunity there. And that's what I've been emphasizing with the Biden-Harris campaign. There's just such an opportunity to engage, not go across the aisle. Vendetta politics is not working in our country. And the idea that, and it's escalated, like I said, to the point where it's a feud. And I think that if both parties and our political system needs to be nurtured, it's like a child right now. And you let it go and it's going to start to fall apart. And I don't know where the Republican Party falls on its ideological and policy stances, to be honest with you. I'm not even sure, because everything was so, the Trump administration was, every day was day one. That's been my experience, and I have firsthand experience of it. And they were single issue, was always one dimensional. It was like, we're going to deal with Iraq right now. And then 6 weeks later, we're going to deal with this. And when I was dealing with Pastor Paula, she, what was important to her in foreign policy, Israel. Anything, if it didn't have to do with Israel, wasn't something of interest to her, Yeah. And but with the same, it's a very similar thing with the Democratic Party. You've got not being Trump is not policy, and so and that's essentially what they won on, is like Trump fatigue, Corona, and the idea, the fact that everybody is just sick of the reality show. So, and everybody, and I'll argue this, I think that most people like to see the toppling of the main star of a reality show, and that's kind of what happened. I had some of my Trump buddies that turned around and they just said, I want to see what he's going to do if he loses the election, and they were supporters. So they were like, they were all in on that side. They had flags.
Into the drama of it all. Yeah.
Yeah, they were kind of like, I wonder what he's going to do. You think he'll start a civil war? I go, this is our country you're talking about. It's like, you get that, so, and they're like, yeah, but you kind of want to see. And I go, well, I don't really want to see. I have no interest. But what an amazing moment in time, female vice president.
Yeah.
It has a very ethnic Indian background, an African-American background. That's hot. That's sexy.
That's good. That's good news for the country.
Yeah, and it's
politics and policy aside, that achievement is a moment is really in time. Good for America. Yeah,
it's a moment in time, and it's just, how cool is that? Then, Biden is as old as president, but I think he's gonna be fine as long as he doesn't have Trump coming at him in a debate. I feel like. I don't think he could have reacted. I don't think anybody can react to Trump. Maybe my cousin would be good on stage with him. Maybe the two of us could handle him together. But I think that
presumably. Okay, I interrupted. Sorry. Go ahead.
No. Interrupt. Go ahead. Presumably what?
I was gonna just say, Trump presumably is not going to leave Twitter himself as his personal account, but as far as the Twitter feed being such a demonstrable influence and expression of the office of the presidency and the Oval Office, that will die down, I think is going to change Twitter for potentially for the better. Trump's still obviously going to be on there and have his followers. And then whatever the new, is it Parler is the new social media that supposedly some conservatives have launched. By and large,
it's only conservatives.
The Twitter, I can't imagine Biden using Twitter and social media quite the way that President Trump has.
I don't believe that the Dems won because of their social media. They didn't win because of their faith engagement. They won because of their personalities. If I was going to say what what are the three things that led to the victory? People were sick of Trump, had Trump fatigue, the coronavirus, and then the personalities did come out. Obama came out surprisingly. I was scratching my head going, okay. And he did. He came out and he was very candid in his speeches. So they brought out the personalities as well. And those are the three things, the three really main reasons. And if you think about it, being sick of Trump and COVID are external to anything to their part, who they are. And so, I always said, the only thing that can undo Trump is like Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson, when he bit Holyfield's ear, that was it. But no, he was unbeatable. Yeah. And the only thing that defeated Trump was Trump. If he could, I think he would have won if he reacted in February, March to COVID. And he wasn't, laid off to Twitter. I think he would have won.
Yeah.
But
I think so. Yeah. We're not. I think COVID took a big chunk out of the economy, and when the economy stinks, regardless of the reason, that tends to blow back on the president, the incumbent president, and they typically lose elections. That's historically
and there's
pretty
the death
strong
toll.
pattern.
I mean,
and COVID specifically, the death toll, but that speaks more to how he and the administration reacted in the early weeks of the pandemic. And so I think he could have, there's a parallel universe in which President Trump is in power, oversees what happens when the COVID pandemic strikes, but manages it a lot differently. And even with the death count as high as it was, could have managed it more, what we would typically consider more presidentially, and won re-election. But they didn't do that. He didn't do that. And when the economy stinks like that, so you get away with a lot of nonsense and personality, aggressiveness, and however you want to describe President Trump. Even if you want to describe it positively as he's a fighter for us, and he messes with the liberals, and even if you want to spin it in a positive fashion, you can get away with a lot with that when there's not something like a public health crisis, like a pandemic that's really messing with everybody and taking a chunk out of the economy like it did.
Well, I mean, I think he could have still reacted the way he reacted in the beginning. And if he just showed a little bit more empathy.
Yeah.
I saw this video of him in the Oval Office, and some guy was saying, I can't remember, was the White House, one of the White House staff says, and the staff's going through a lot because of COVID and this and that and everything else. And maybe take a moment to think about all the stuff that everybody's been going through. And Trump's going, and then as soon as he just waited until the guy ended, and he goes, does anybody want any pens? Does anybody want any pens? Some White House, and he's handing White House pen. And that video went viral. And it's just, he's just not, he doesn't have it. And so he just, I don't even think it appears that he doesn't care. It's quite clear that he doesn't have that mechanism, and so when you feel like someone doesn't care, and you have somebody who's passed away or is sick or is this and that, and it's my brother Ali, he had COVID, survived it, and it was a big thing, it was a big scare, and my cousin had it, and it changed his whole opinion about Trump.
Yeah.
He survived. My cousin was a big time Trumper, and he changed it. He goes, people don't realize the after effects, what's going on, and we need to attack this and deal with it. He works, he does respirators. He works in the hospitals, frontline worker. He goes, we don't have enough equipment. He goes, and the president's giving equipment to Russia. What for? So these things are really affected some of the votes that came to him. And those are external to the Dems.
Yeah.
That's
insightful.
Yeah. And so I don't think you can underestimate the impact of that. And thinking of, if you count COVID or know somebody, and then you're seeing people without face masks, and whatever your argument is against it, is that we all need to do something. There was a point when we had tuberculosis and yellow fever, and what happened to those people? They would take them out of the population and put them in some kind of facility somewhere to either recover or die. Yeah. And we didn't do any of that. We couldn't even agree on face masks. Couldn't even agree on how to protect each other and ourselves. Yeah. And so I think that I think the Democratic Party really needs to kind of look at those components and look at why they won. And like I said, Republicans now, I watched Republicans go from popular sovereignty, Jeffersonian, to claim to be Jeffersonians, to look at and fully endorse the imperialism. Everything needs to be done in executive order, not going to Congress, not going to lobby, not going to build our coalitions. And that is disturbing in itself too, because we can't keep building the strength of the executive office at the expense of the legislative and judicial bodies.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's not going to serve us well at all. So, but anyways, last word. Why don't you tell us what should Trump do now with his free time?
Well, frankly, I'm more interested in what Republicans do after Trump is out of office. So the big question for Republicans is, number one, you have an election where the American people, broadly speaking, did not reject your party, but rejected your president. And that's a really interesting nuance that Republicans, I think you're seeing the early stages of people trying to get their head around, is how much is Trump going to stick around and try to control the Republican Party, and how influential will his kind of the true believers, how influential will they be in the Republican Party moving forward? Because you have a lot of evidence that a lot of non-Trumpian folks and Republicans won the day, and so there seems to be a surprising, frankly, I was surprised, a surprising window of opportunity again for Republicans to kind of brush themselves off from the Trump era and move on and reclaim its roots. I'm nervous as a voting Republican. I'm nervous about what's possible there, and I'm not going to make any predictions. But that's the fork road in front of Republicans.
Is it a Mitt Romney world? Is it a Kasich world? Is it what would you say is, are you going to just make up a candidate? Shaigo Bobbin?
Right. I think that's it. I think that's the question though. I think is that playing field right there is open. And so I think you've got to figure out if it's the Romneys and the Rubios and the Jeb Bushes of the world. They got to figure out if they want to be kind of return to ascendance in the Republican Party. They got to figure out how to tap into enough of the Trump thing, or at least what Trump voters wanted out of the Republican Party, and capitalize that, right? But kind of more redirect that energy in a more fruitful way. We'll see if that's possible. The big critique of Jeb in 2016 in the primaries was that he kind of rattled off complaints about the big government stuff, but then he said something about, but I'm not mad about it. And that was a focal point of kind of an example of what was really agitating a lot of conservatives and a lot of Republicans, is that's what they felt from the Republican Party, was that they were not as mad. Leadership in the Republican Party and kind of the more moderate Republicans were not as mad and animated and angry at the overreaches of the federal government as much as they thought they should. And so they went with someone like Trump, who proved it, and iterated that emotional component, right or wrong. That's part of what I think Republicans were dealing with, and nobody in the primaries could really get a handle on that without shooting themselves in the foot.
Well, I think it's anybody's game with both parties now, and
right, exactly.
Like I said, they're going to have to. I guess the Dems are going to have to. Biden Harris I hope they bring in new blood. I hope they do. I've got a lot of my Democratic friends that are going, well, I'm going to quit. They're going to, it's only a matter of time before they call me because I'm coming back. And I'm like, did you even show up for work when you were an appointee? And then, and like I said, with the Republican Party, you're post-Trump. I think he's going to want to lead the party still. And I think that he's going to make Mar-a-Lago the center. And I think that there's going to be a healthy amount of pressure on the party, more so than the Dems. I think it's going to be more so than I maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Trump will flip it and just keep hammering the left, but he's got to deal with his own party now, and he's gonna and if his personality, if it's the last 4 years are any indication, he's gonna try to clean house in the Republican Party and make that his family business.
Yeah, because he's not, again, in the pattern of Trump and breaking norms, he's not gonna go. He's not going to stay a prominent figure for the sake of a future candidate, right? The whole whatever his hand touches, it's going to be about him.
Yeah, I mean, well,
he's not going to like let me come alongside this future Republican candidate and lend my support to him in a way that like takes energy away from him or looks different than his presidency. That's just not going to happen. So that's why I'm a little skeptical as to what's really possible within the Republican Party, but it's more possible now than at any point in the past 4 years.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the insight. I think we've got, we can dance around all the issues and chat about, but I think from a post-election, here we are, what's going on with our the president, and I think and the Democratic Party, Biden, Harris, president, VP elect. I think there's a very good opportunity for both parties to collaborate. We're in the sort of an eye of the storm where we can figure out our tactics and what we need to do. And that's, kind of yours and my sweet spot, but I appreciate taking the time and appreciate the insight, Bub.
Likewise, my friend. See you next time.
Yes,
this has been Crossing Phase, a podcast featuring a Christian and a Muslim talking religion and politics, available on YouTube and anywhere you listen to podcasts.